When the sun rose over the red soil of Engala, the world saw nothing unusual, just another quiet African morning. But beneath that silence, a storm was brewing. A leader once praised as a savior was now hunted like a criminal. His people whispered his name in fear, yet their hearts still beat for his return. The government called him a traitor. The poor called him hope. And somewhere between loyalty and betrayal, a nation waited for justice. Because when truth is buried in the dust, how long before it rises again? Would you stand for justice or stay silent? Before the chaos, he was known simply as Temba Ndlovu, the son of a school teacher and a farmer, a man who believed knowledge was stronger than any weapon. In the heart of Cavuru, a land rich in soil but poor in justice, Temba had built more than schools. He had built hope. Every morning, children walked miles barefoot to sit beneath mango trees, where he taught them about Africa's forgotten heroes, the kind of leaders who didn't wear crowns, but carried their people's pain. To the villagers, Temba wasn't just a teacher. He was a promise that change was still possible. His voice echoed through dusty classrooms, reminding everyone that dignity was not a luxury, and freedom was not a favor to be granted. But hope is dangerous in a land ruled by fear. As Temba's influence grew, whispers began to circle. Whispers that frightened men in polished offices. They said he was uniting the poor, awakening the silent, and questioning the system that fed the few while starving the many. He didn't seek power, only fairness. Yet in a nation where truth itself was a threat, that made him an enemy. One evening, as the crimson sun dipped below the horizon, soldiers arrived at the edge of the village, their boots crushing the dust where children once played. Inside his small house, Temba looked at the flickering lamp and knew the lesson was over. The test had begun, because sometimes the price of teaching truth is becoming its first example. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Soldiers roamed through Cavuru, their shadows swallowing laughter, their rifles replacing the sound of drums. The school was locked, its chalkboards wiped clean, as if erasing lessons could erase ideas. Temba Ndlovu was no longer a teacher. He had become a symbol, and symbols the government feared most. They came for him at dawn. Hands bound, eyes steady, he was taken away without a word. But what they didn't realize was that when they captured Temba, they awakened something far greater than fear. The villagers watched from behind doors, their hearts burning with quiet defiance. Mothers whispered his name like a prayer, and fathers clenched their fists, waiting for a day that seemed both distant and near. In the capital city, the newspapers called him a traitor. The ministers labeled him a threat to national peace. But deep down, the people knew. Peace built on silence is nothing but another kind of war. In a cold cell smelling of sweat and dust, Temba sat alone, replaying his last lesson to the children. Knowledge is power, he had told them. But courage is freedom. Now those words felt heavier than ever. The guards mocked him, but he never spoke back. He only smiled, a quiet smile that unsettled even his captors. Days turned into weeks. Hunger gnawed at his strength, but his spirit refused to break. One evening, through the narrow bars, he saw the horizon stained with fire. The government had burned the village's crops. It was meant as punishment, a message that resistance had a price. But instead of fear, it sowed rage. The same people who once bowed their heads now stood together. They rebuilt what they could, shared what little they had, and sent messages through secret routes. Temba still lives. Then, one night, something unexpected happened. A young soldier, barely older than Temba's students, slipped a folded note through the bars of his cell. It read, "They fear your words more than your actions. Speak again, and the world will listen." The next day, Temba refused the warden's command to kneel. When they beat him, he stood. When they silenced him, he hummed the old village song of unity, a melody so old even the guards recognized it. Slowly, that song spread beyond the prison walls. Workers began to hum it in factories. Students painted his name on walls. Farmers carved his initials into tree trunks. Temba's imprisonment had become a mirror, reflecting the truth the government tried to hide, that you can chain a man, but not his message. When the president saw the unrest spreading across the nation, he ordered an example to be made. The execution was set for sunrise. But as the soldiers prepared, crowds gathered outside the prison, men, women, children, all carrying candles. One voice began to sing, then another, and another. The same song that had started in the heart of a teacher now thundered through thousands. The world began to watch. By dawn, the soldiers hesitated. Their orders met the weight of their conscience. And for the first time in years, the government faced something stronger than fear: unity. The question now wasn't whether Temba would survive. It was whether the nation could remain blind to its awakening. The morning of Temba's execution broke like a wound across the sky, red, raw, and trembling. The prison courtyard smelled of rain and gunpowder. Soldiers lined up in silence, their rifles trembling slightly in their hands. Beyond the gates, thousands of voices gathered, chanting his name through the mist. The sound rose like thunder from the soil itself, unyielding and alive. Temba was led forward, his bare feet dragging through the mud. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt, but his eyes still burned with the calm fire of conviction. The general barked the final order. The rifles lifted, and then silence. A soldier in the front row lowered his gun. Another followed. Soon half the line had turned away. The general's voice cracked with fury, but no one moved. The chant outside the walls grew louder. Temba lives. Temba lives. In that single moment, the weight of years of fear began to crumble. Temba stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper, but carried by something larger than sound. "You can kill the man," he said, "but you cannot bury the truth." The general raised his pistol, shaking, eyes wide with rage. But before he could fire, a gunshot echoed, not from the firing line, but from behind. The young soldier who once passed Temba, the note had turned his weapon, not toward Temba, but toward tyranny. Chaos erupted. The crowd outside broke through the prison gates. Soldiers dropped their arms. Some wept, some joined the people. And through it all, Temba stood unmoved, blood on his shirt, hope in his heart. He looked up at the sky as rain began to fall, washing the dust, the fear, and the lies from the earth. In that rain-soaked courtyard, a nation was reborn, not through war, but through courage. And as the people lifted Temba onto their shoulders, the world realized something that no bullet could erase. A voice that rises for justice never truly falls silent. But freedom, as Africa would soon learn, was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. When the storm of rebellion finally settled, the nation stood on unfamiliar ground. The old regime had fallen, not through the power of armies, but through the unshakable will of its people. The world called it a revolution. But to the villagers of Cavuru, it was simply justice coming home. Temba Ndlovu never claimed victory. He returned to his village quietly, walking barefoot along the same dusty road where his journey began. The school, once burned to ashes, now stood taller than ever, rebuilt by the very hands that once trembled in fear. Children once again gathered beneath the mango trees, learning not only to read and write, but to remember what courage costs and what silence allows. The nation began to heal, though scars remained. For every victory song, there was still a mother who mourned. For every flag raised in triumph, there was still a name whispered in grief. But through that pain, a new kind of unity was born, one rooted not in tribe or power, but in shared struggle. And Temba? He refused any title, any office, any crown. He said leadership was not about standing above others, but standing with them. "If I ever lead again," he told the people, "it will be from the classroom." Years later, when his story spread beyond borders, many would ask how one teacher changed an entire nation. The answer, whispered in the winds of Africa, was simple. He reminded the people that freedom isn't given. It's taught, earned, and protected. Because every generation faces its own prisons, some made of bars, others made of fear. And somewhere, another Temba waits, holding the same light against the same darkness. The question is, will we carry that light forward, or wait for another to rise? Because in the heart of Africa, leadership is not about power, it's about awakening.